The night Eliana Kamanzi's entire life collapsed, she was wearing her husband's favorite perfume. She had bought jollof rice from the caterer Andre liked, lit the candles he once said made their dining room feel like a five-star restaurant, and changed into the wine-colored dress that used to make him pause at doorways. It was their 7th wedding anniversary. She had planned every detail for 3 weeks. But Andre was not at the dining table. He was in his study, door slightly ajar, voice low and warm in a way Eliana had not heard directed at her in over a year. She stopped in the hallway, not because she intended to eavesdrop, but because something in her chest, some deep, animal instinct that women carry long before their minds catch up, told her to be very still. She still doesn't know, Andre was saying, a soft laugh threading through his words. 7 years, and the woman has never once looked at the actual accounts. She just signs whatever I put in front of her. A woman's voice on the other end giggled. Eliana recognized the cadence of someone enjoying a private joke at another person's expense. The Eziani Foundation has processed over 48 million naira in the last 3 years, Nola. 48 million. And not one kobo has gone to any school, any clinic, or any widow. It all flows through the shell accounts we set up in Abuja. Eliana's hand found the wall. Her father's money, Andre continued, his voice dropping to something almost tender with satisfaction. The old man thinks he is building a legacy. He is building my retirement. The candles were still burning in the dining room behind her. The jollof rice was still warm. The wine-colored dress still fit perfectly. But Eliana Kamanzi stood in that hallway and understood, with the quiet devastation of someone watching a building fall in slow motion, that she had spent 7 years being the most useful fool in Port Harcourt. She did not cry. She did not push the door open. She did not make a sound. She simply turned around, walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and began to think. And that silence was the most dangerous thing Andre Kamanzi would ever underestimate. Before we continue, let me ask you something quietly. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Some of us are hearing this story under the hot afternoon sun. Some in the calm of the night, when thoughts are heavy and hearts are open. Different places, one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this story reach another soul. Your comment tells me you understand the lesson. And when you share, you may be saving someone from the same mistake. Now, let us continue. Eliana had always believed that loving someone carefully was enough to keep them honest. She was the kind of woman Port Harcourt's elite admired from a respectful distance, composed, educated, never excessive in her opinions or theatrical in her emotions. She had graduated top of her pharmacy class at the University of Port Harcourt, turned down a postgraduate scholarship in London because her father's health had been uncertain that year, and built her professional reputation through patience and precision. Those who knew her well said she carried her father's discipline and her mother's grace in equal and complementary measure. She was not the kind of woman who made rooms fall silent when she entered. She was the kind whose absence, once noticed, could not easily be filled. Chief William Eziani had not been a simple man to impress. He came from oil money but lived and spoke like a man who had built everything with his own hands and his own judgment. He had grown the Eziani family name into something that carried genuine weight across Rivers State, not merely through accumulated wealth, but through visible, documented community investment. Schools constructed in Agoni, boreholes drilled in Alim, medical outreach programs in communities the government had abandoned without apology. When he retired from the upstream sector at 62, he gathered his family and said plainly that the only inheritance worth leaving behind was a name people spoke with gratitude rather than envy. That conviction was why the Eziani Foundation meant so much to him. And that was precisely why, when Andre stood in Chief William's sitting room and presented a detailed operational framework for formally registering and expanding the foundation, complete with projected impact reports, community partnership proposals, and a 5-year growth plan, the old man had been moved in a way his family rarely witnessed. This boy understands what legacy actually means, he told Mama Amanda that evening after Andre had left, his voice carrying the particular warmth of a man who has found unexpected confirmation of a decision he had already made. "I chose well for my daughter." Mama Amanda had said nothing immediately. She was a woman who read people through their silences and their small unconscious gestures rather than through their prepared speeches. Something in the precise way Andre smiled, held just a fraction too long, released just a beat too deliberately, had never fully settled inside her. But Chief William's word on matters of family and business carried the weight of conclusion in their household. She folded her reservation quietly and said nothing further. Eliana had met Andre at a charity dinner in 2016, hosted by a Petroleum Industry Association at a hotel in the GRA. He had been presenting on sustainable infrastructure development in underserved Niger Delta communities, and he spoke with a kind of grounded, unhurried passion that made people in expensive chairs lean forward without realizing they were doing it. He was not loud. He was not performing. He was precise, genuinely burdened in his manner, and spoke about community suffering with the specific weight of someone who had personally witnessed what he was describing. She fell in love with what she believed was his conscience. They married within 18 months. The wedding at Remula Township filled 3 full marquee tents. Chief Williams spared nothing. The photographs still hung in the family sitting room, Eliana radiant in ivory, Andre composed and steady beside her, the complete image of a man who had arrived at precisely where he always intended to be. The early years were not unpleasant. Andre was attentive in the particular way of a man who understands that consistency is the most convincing form of deception. He remembered significant dates, engaged warmly at family gatherings, and spoke about their future children with what appeared to be genuine anticipation. But Eliana, reviewing everything now with the brutal clarity that only betrayal produces, could identify the exact season the texture of their marriage began to quietly change. It was the year the foundation launched its public operations. Andre's energy shifted in ways she had registered without examining. He became busier, less present in conversation, quicker to redirect any discussion that moved toward financial specifics. When Eliana offered to review the foundation's quarterly reports, he responded with a gentle laugh and told her she was already contributing everything necessary, her name on the letterhead, her face at community events, her warmth and credibility in front of donors and beneficiaries. That was her role, he explained. Operations were his. She had accepted it because she trusted him completely. Dr. Chidi Uma had flagged something once, carefully, almost reluctantly, over pepper soup at their favorite roadside spot in D-Line. He had been reviewing the foundation's social media presence and noticed that none of the listed project locations appeared in any government development registry he could find. "Have you personally visited any of these project sites, Eli?" he asked, his voice carrying the deliberate neutrality of someone choosing words with care. She had laughed easily. "Chidi, Andre manages operations. I manage community relations. That is how we divided it." Chidi had nodded once and returned to his food without pressing further. But he had looked at her briefly, just once, with the particular quiet sadness of a man who already understands the answer to a question the other person has not yet thought to ask themselves. That look had lived in a small, unexamined corner of Eliana's mind for months afterward. She had never retrieved it. She had never wanted to, until now, standing in a dim hallway in a wine-red dress, holding a candle that had begun to drip unnoticed onto the marble floor beneath her feet, listening to her husband laugh softly into a phone about the woman whose trust had made everything possible. She set the candle down carefully on the hallway table. She straightened her dress. And she walked back to the bedroom with the measured steps of a woman who had just made a decision she would not be reversing. Eliana did not sleep that night. She sat at the small writing desk in the corner of the bedroom while Andre returned from his study around midnight, kissed her forehead with the casual ease of a man with nothing on his conscience, and fell asleep within minutes. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest in the darkness and felt something she had not expected. Not rage, not grief, but a cold, clarifying anger that sharpened her mind rather than clouding it. She had always been methodical. It was what made her a good pharmacist, the ability to trace a problem backward through its symptoms to its source without letting emotion corrupt the diagnosis. That same instinct now took over completely. Over the following 4 days, Eliana moved quietly. She did not change her behavior. She prepared Andre's morning tea, attended a foundation community event in Rimuokoro, where she smiled for photographs beside a school block that existed, and responded to Mama Amanda's weekly phone call with her usual warmth. She was performing normalcy with the discipline of someone who understood that the moment Andre sensed disruption, evidence would disappear. What she was doing in the margins of those normal days was entirely different. She contacted Dr. Chidi Uma on a Tuesday afternoon, using a text from her consultancy phone rather than her personal line. She asked him to meet her at his clinic in D-Line under the pretense of a routine consultation. When she arrived and the door was closed, she placed a folded paper on his desk, a list of the foundation's publicly listed projects alongside the addresses she had spent 2 nights cross-referencing against Rivers state government development records, satellite map data, and community association contacts. Chidi studied the list for a long time without speaking. "Eli," he finally said, "none of these projects physically exist." "I know," she said. "How long?" he asked. "At least 3 years based on what I've been able to trace. Possibly from the beginning." Chidi leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the softness that usually lived in his expression had been replaced by something firm and purposeful. "You need a lawyer before you need anything else," he said. "Not a family lawyer. Someone with criminal practice experience." That was how Barrister Bamadiel Akins entered Eliana's life. Bamadiel was 42, known in Port Harcourt legal circles for financial crime prosecutions and for the particular quality of her cross-examinations. She had a way of constructing questions that made witnesses feel the walls closing before they understood why. Chidi had worked alongside her during a hospital fraud case 2 years earlier and trusted her completely. Their first meeting lasted 3 hours. Eliana laid out everything: the overheard phone call, the account discrepancies she had traced, the non-existent project sites, the shell company names she had found by carefully reviewing documents she had previously signed without reading. Bamadiel said very little throughout. She took notes with the focused intensity of someone assembling a structure, not just recording information. At the end, she looked at Eliana directly. "You understand that once we file this, it cannot be quietly managed. This goes to the Nigeria Police Financial Crimes Unit, and from there to prosecution. Your husband will be arrested. Your father's name will appear in court documents. Port Harcourt will talk." "Port Harcourt already talks," Eliana said. "The difference is that right now it talks about my family's generosity. I would like it to eventually talk about our integrity." Bamadiel studied her for a moment, then nodded once with what appeared to be genuine respect. What neither of them knew yet was that Nola Dlamini, sensing something had shifted in Andre's usual composure over recent days, had begun quietly moving funds through one of the secondary shell accounts, accelerating withdrawals in a way that would later serve as critical additional evidence of conscious criminal participation. Greed, Bamadiel would later note in her case summary, has a reliable tendency to document itself. Back in the GRA estate, Andre was planning their anniversary trip to Zanzibar. He had booked a beachfront suite. He bought Eliana a bracelet from a jeweler on ABA Road. He was attentive and warm in the way he occasionally cycled back to, just long enough to reset any tension, never long enough to invite scrutiny. He had no idea that the woman sitting across from him at breakfast each morning had already handed the first documented evidence package to a criminal lawyer. He had underestimated her silence once. He would not get the opportunity to do it again. Chief William Ezeani, meanwhile, was preparing to transfer an additional 15 million naira into the foundation's main account, a contribution he had announced at his church's men's fellowship as his personal act of gratitude for another year of life. Eliana found out on a Thursday evening. She called Bamadiel immediately. "We need to move faster," she said. "I know," Bamadiel replied. "I filed the formal complaint this morning." The arrest came on a Friday morning, and Port Harcourt was already awake when it happened. Andre had been in the driveway at 7:43, standing beside his car in a freshly pressed charcoal suit, briefcase in his right hand, adjusting his wristwatch with the unhurried composure of a man whose morning was proceeding exactly as planned. He was due at a Foundation stakeholder meeting by 9. He had eaten breakfast. He had kissed Eliana on the cheek. He had taken his car keys from the hook beside the front door the same way he had taken them every working morning for 7 years. 2 unmarked vehicles turned into the compound before he reached the driver's door. 4 officers stepped out. Plain clothes. Measured movements. The particular unhurried efficiency of people who have rehearsed an operation and are now simply executing it. Barrister Bamidele Aiken stepped out behind the second vehicle, dressed in a dark blazer, a thin folder of documents held under one arm, her expression completely neutral in the way of someone who has separated personal feeling from professional function. Andres saw her first. His hand tightened around the briefcase handle. Something moved across his face, not panic immediately, but the specific alertness of a man whose instincts are faster than his reasoning, registering that something is catastrophically wrong before his mind has fully assembled the explanation. The lead officer addressed him by his full name. Read him his rights in clear, measured Yoruba-accented English. Andres stood completely still throughout, his briefcase still in his hand, his eyes moving once, briefly, involuntarily, upward toward the first floor of the house. Eliana was at the bedroom window. She had been there since 6:30, dressed, sitting in the chair beside the window with a cup of tea she had not touched, watching the driveway. She had known the exact time. She had confirmed it with Bamidele the previous evening. She had chosen not to leave the house because she needed, not for drama, not for satisfaction, but for some deep psychological necessity she could not fully articulate even to herself, to witness the moment that the lie she had been living inside finally met its physical consequence in the visible, undeniable world. When Andre's eyes found the window and found her face, the last constructed version of him dissolved completely. She did not move. She did not gesture. She simply looked back at him with the stillness of a woman who had already grieved everything this moment was taking from her and had nothing left to perform. His expression in that final held moment before the officers redirected his attention was something she would carry for years. Not anger, not defiance, but a raw, unfiltered recognition. The realization, arriving too late to be useful, that the silence he had mistaken for passivity had been, from the very beginning, a woman paying extremely careful attention. He was taken in for questioning by 9. Formally arrested by early afternoon. Nola Dlamini was picked up separately at her office in the GRA commercial district at 11:15. She had apparently spent the preceding 48 hours attempting to delete files and transfer remaining funds through a secondary shell account, a sequence of actions that Bamidele noted, without visible satisfaction, constituted textbook consciousness of guilt and would prove straightforwardly admissible as supporting evidence of knowing criminal participation. The news entered Port Harcourt's social bloodstream before the close of business. By Saturday morning it had reached 3 local news platforms. By Sunday evening it carried national coverage. The Ezeani Foundation. 48 million naira across 3 financial years. Shell companies. A wife whose name and face had been used as the credibility infrastructure of her own family's deception. Chief William Ezeani received the news from his personal driver, who had seen the initial report on his phone while waiting outside a shop in Remulla. The chief sat in the back of the stationary car for 11 full minutes, without speaking or moving. His driver later told family members that the silence had been the most frightening thing he had witnessed in 17 years of service, not because it was loud, but because it was the silence of a man whose entire understanding of a chapter of his life was being rewritten in real time with no possibility of revision. When he finally spoke, he asked to be taken home. He said nothing further during the drive. Mama Amanda was in the kitchen when her husband walked through the door and sat down at the dining table with the specific stillness of a man whose body had accepted something his mind was still constructing walls against. She looked at his face for 3 seconds and understood, without a single word being exchanged, that something permanent and irreversible had entered their family and would not be leaving. "Where's Eliana?" was the only thing he said. She was at Chitty's clinic in D-Line. Not for strategy, not for legal preparation, but because it was the only place in the entirety of Port Harcourt where she could sit in a chair without being required to perform strength for someone else's comfort. Chitty had made tea without asking, had sat across from her without filling the silence unnecessarily, had simply been present in the complete and uncomplicated way that only people who have known each other across decades can manage. When her phone screen lit up with her father's name, she stared at it through 2 full rings. Eliana. His voice arrived stripped of everything, the authority, the steadiness, the carefully maintained composure of a man accustomed to being the largest presence in any room he entered. What remained was something nakedly human and heartbreaking. "I know, Daddy," she said quietly. A long pause. "Did you know before?" "No. I found out the same way. Just earlier." Another silence. Longer this time. "Why didn't you bring it to me first?" The question carried no accusation. Only the genuine confusion of a father trying to locate himself in a story he had not known he was living inside. Eliana had prepared for this question. She had rehearsed answers across several sleepless nights. In the moment, with her father's fractured voice in her ear and Chitty sitting quietly across from her, only the complete truth felt possible. "Because you would have managed it quietly, Daddy. And it deserved to not be managed quietly." The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. "You are right," Chief William said finally, his voice carrying the full weight of a man setting down something he had been holding incorrectly for a very long time. "You are completely right. Being right," Eliana discovered, "does not arrive the way you imagine it will during the moments you spent preparing for it." She had expected relief. She had anticipated the clean, expansive feeling of a burden finally set down after being carried too long in silence. What arrived instead was something entirely different, a profound, bone-level exhaustion that settled into her chest and her joints and refused to be reasoned away by the logic of correct decisions. She had done the necessary thing. She had been precise and courageous and had protected her family's legacy from further violation. She had looked at the most painful truth of her adult life and refused to look away from it. And none of that, not one fraction of it, changed the reality that she woke up every single morning in a house that still carried the physical memory of the life she had built beside a man who had never been who she believed he was. The sheets still smelled faintly of his cologne for the first 4 days. She washed them twice. Port Harcourt's social world, a layered, interconnected universe of church associations, elite women's fellowships, industry wives circles, and charity event networks, processed the story with the particular efficiency of a community that disguises appetite for detail as an expression of concern. Women who had attended Foundation events and smiled in photographs beside Eliana called Mama Amanda to offer sympathy in carefully modulated tones that barely concealed the fascination underneath. A senior church elder approached Chief William after the second Sunday service following the arrest and suggested, with the practiced gentleness of a man delivering an unwelcome opinion he had already decided on, that the family might benefit from a period of deliberate reduced public visibility while matters resolved themselves. Chief William thanked him politely. Then he went home, sat in his study for 2 hours, and did not speak to anyone. One of Eliana's former university colleagues posted a lengthy reflection on social media about the critical importance of wives maintaining active involvement in their husbands' financial affairs. The post received 412 reactions. It managed, with considerable skill, to simultaneously acknowledge the fraud and position Eliana's trust as a contributing factor in her own deception. Eliana read it once, closed the application, and did not open social media again for 11 days. Mama Amanda was the most complicated dimension of everything that followed. She loved her daughter with the fierce, unconditional completeness of a woman who had carried Eliana through every difficult season of her life without once being asked. That love was never in question, not for a single moment. But Mama Amanda was also a woman shaped by 64 years of navigating a world that demanded women absorb, manage, and contain, and she had survived that world by believing, with absolute conviction, that certain categories of problem were best resolved quietly inside family walls before the wider world was ever permitted to form an opinion. She came to Eliana's house on a Wednesday evening, sat in the living room with her hands folded precisely in her lap, and said what she had come to say, without softening it. "You have turned your father's name into a court case, Eliana." Eliana set down her glass of water and met her mother's eyes directly. "Andre turned Daddy's name into a crime," she replied, keeping her voice completely level. "I turned it into a prosecution. Those are not the same thing. People will not stop to understand the distinction. Then people will be wrong. And they will have to carry that." The silence that followed was long and textured. Mama Amanda looked at her daughter for an extended moment, not with anger and not entirely with disagreement, but with the specific expression of a woman confronting the gap between the world she had learned to navigate and the world her daughter had decided to demand. Then she reached across the space between them and took Eliana's hand in both of hers without saying anything further. It was not an apology. It was not a concession. But it was something Eliana needed more than either of those things, the simple, wordless communication that love had not been withdrawn even where understanding had not yet fully arrived. Andre's deterioration inside custody filtered through in fragments. His defense counsel released carefully worded public statements. His mother, a woman Eliana had genuinely respected throughout the marriage, issued a brief request for prayers and expressed that the family was processing events with shock and grief. Two of Andre's closest professional associates released coordinated statements of distance, written in the careful language of men who had privately suspected something for years and were now simply documenting that suspicion retroactively for public record. Nola Dlamini's statement to the investigating officers, forwarded to Eliana by Barrister Bamadil without commentary, constructed a version of events in which Nola had gradually and reluctantly come to understand the full scope of what Andre had built, positioning herself as someone swept along by circumstance rather than an active and knowing participant. It was a precisely calibrated piece of self-preservation dressed as confession. Bamadil had attached a single typed line at the bottom of the forwarded document. "It will not hold under cross-examination." Eliana read Nola's statement twice from beginning to end. She felt no rage. She felt no vindication. What she felt was a quiet, settled sadness at watching someone choose the comfort of a manageable lie over the dignity of an honest accounting, even at the stage when honesty could no longer change anything that mattered. Dr. Chitty came every 2 days without making it feel like surveillance. He brought food on Tuesday evenings, always something warm, always more than enough for one person, never accompanied by the expectation of conversation if she did not want it. He asked practical, grounded questions about sleep and appetite. He never encouraged her toward emotional performances of recovery she had not genuinely reached. He simply made himself consistently available in the specific way of a person who understands that presence, offered without agenda, is the most useful form of love during the seasons when everything else feels unstable. The hardest night came on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the arrest. Eliana was clearing unread emails from her consultancy inbox when she found the Zanzibar booking confirmation, the anniversary trip Andre had planned and never mentioned to her. 2 beachfront nights at a lodge she would have genuinely loved. Her name on the reservation. Departure date 2 weeks from the night she had stood in the hallway and heard everything. He had booked it the same week he had called Nola to laugh about the foundation accounts. She sat with the screen open for a long time, without moving. She did not cry immediately. She simply absorbed the specific, layered cruelty of it, that he had been capable of booking an anniversary trip and engineering a fraud inside the same 7-day window, and had experienced no apparent friction between those two actions whatsoever. Then she forwarded the confirmation to Bamadil with a single line, additional documentation of sustained normal behavior maintenance during active fraud period. She closed the laptop. She turned off the bedside lamp. She sat in the complete darkness of the bedroom she had shared for 7 years with a man she had loved carefully and completely and foolishly. And she allowed herself, for the first and only time since the hallway, to cry without restraint, not for Andre, not even entirely for herself, but for the version of Eliana Kamanzi, who had deserved an honest life and had instead been handed a beautifully constructed performance of one. She cried until there was nothing left to release. Then she lay down, pulled the freshly washed sheets around her, and went to sleep. Tomorrow, Betrayal had a pre-trial hearing. Eliana had agreed to be present.
She would be there, composed,
On time. Ready. The trial lasted 9 weeks. Federal High Court, Port Harcourt Division. Presiding Judge, Justice Adora Nwankwo, a woman known for the quality of her written judgments and her particular intolerance for financial crimes, dressed in charitable clothing. The courtroom filled differently each day. Journalists on the left benches, family members distributed carefully on both sides, and ordinary Port Harcourt residents who had donated to the Eliana Foundation, attending not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a deeply personal sense of having been deceived alongside Eliana. Barrister Betrayal Akins presented the case with the methodical precision she had promised from their very first meeting. Bank records showing 48 million naira processed through the Eliana Foundation across 3 financial years, with documented disbursement flowing into 4 shell companies, all registered within an 18-month window, all sharing one single beneficial owner, Andre Kamanzi. Project verification reports from community leaders across 7 listed locations confirmed 0 evidence of any foundation activity on the ground. No school blocks. No boreholes. No medical outreach. Nothing but photographs staged at locations the foundation had never funded and names borrowed from communities that had never received a single intervention. The correspondence between Andre and Nola Dlamini, retrieved through court-order disclosure, proved most damaging of all. 2 specific messages explicitly discussed Eliana's trust as a structural asset, a deliberate operational decision to keep her visible, credible, and uninformed. The foundation needed her name. It needed her face at community events. It needed her genuine warmth to convince Chief William to keep releasing funds. She had not been an innocent bystander in the architecture of the fraud. She had been its most essential component, used without her knowledge or consent. That deliberate exploitation of a wife's trust as an operational tool appeared to weigh particularly heavily on Justice Nwankwo. Her questioning of the defense during cross-examination carried a focused intensity that observers in the gallery described as barely contained fury dressed in judicial composure. Andre's defense counsel maintained that the financial mismanagement resulted from poor governance rather than deliberate criminal intent. The argument collapsed progressively under the weight of the shell company documentation, the timeline of registrations, and the explicit nature of the recovered communications. 3 separate procedural motions to restrict certain evidence were filed. All 3 were denied without elaboration. Nola Dlamini pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of conspiracy to commit financial fraud in exchange for full cooperation with prosecution. She received a 2-year suspended sentence and a financial restitution order covering her personally traceable withdrawals. She left the courtroom on the day of her sentencing walking quickly, her eyes fixed forward, never once turning toward the gallery, where Eliana sat with her hands folded in her lap. Andre Kamanzi was found guilty on 2 counts of criminal fraud, 1 count of conspiracy, and 1 count of obtaining financial benefit by deception. Justice Nwankwo sentenced him to 7 years imprisonment without the option of a fine. In her written judgment, she described the offense as calculated, sustained, and uniquely intimate in its betrayal, a crime that had used the infrastructure of marriage itself as its primary instrument of concealment. 7 years. Precisely the length of the marriage. Eliana did not feel triumph when the sentence was read aloud. She felt the particular stillness of a conclusion, the moment when something that has been unresolved for too long finally settles into its permanent shape and stops moving. Chief William Eziani had attended every single day of the trial. He sat 3 rows behind his daughter each morning, said very little, but was present with a consistency that communicated what words had repeatedly failed to carry. On the afternoon of the verdict, as they filed out of the courtroom into the heavy Port Harcourt air, he placed his hand briefly on Eliana's shoulder. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. They walked out together without speaking. The silence between them was not empty. It was the fullest kind, 2 people who understood each other completely and needed nothing further confirmed. The Eliana Foundation was formally dissolved by court order. Chief William subsequently established a new community trust, smaller, transparently governed, independently audited quarterly, with Eliana and Dr. Chidi Uma appointed as co-trustees by formal legal instrument. The first project funded was a pharmaceutical outreach program in Alim. Eliana staffed it herself every third Saturday. Mama Amanda came to the first outreach day. She stood beside her daughter at the registration table for 6 hours without complaint or commentary. At one point, one of the community women asked if she was proud of her daughter. Mama Amanda looked at Eliana for a long moment before answering. "She has always known what I taught her," she said quietly. She just had the courage to use it when it cost her something. Eliana heard it from 3 feet away. She did not turn around. She continued writing names into the registration book with steady hands and allowed the words to settle somewhere deep and permanent inside her, not as validation, but as the quiet closure of a chapter that had taken everything from her and, in the very same motion, shown her exactly who she was. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal and tell me where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.